you're black, you're going to play hockey. It's not going to happen. How can you even think you're going to do that? Why are you wasting your time? Why aren't you running track? Why aren't you playing basketball more? Why aren't you playing football? Those are sports where you have an opportunity. And quite frankly, as I said, what was wild about that is that's for people, again, that look like me, and for people that didn't, that felt that way. And it never, ever, ever occurred to me the fact that as a youngster, there are only 50 to 60 NHL goalies in the world. I never thought about that. And as I got older, I never thought about that. All I knew was I was going to freaking get there, and I was going to make it, and I was going to be there.
This is the Impossible Podcast, an exploration of stories that broke convention, set new standards, smashed glass ceilings, and redefined the notion of what's possible. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, no matter where you're joining from, we're so glad to have you. Welcome to Impossible. My name is Megan Rokosh. I'm the Global Chief Marketing Officer for Havas Health and You, and I am joined today by two of my favorite people, one of whom is our fabulous co-host, Ashley Miles.
Hi there, Ashley Miles, founder and CEO of Franklin West, a business growth collective committed to transformation and sustainable growth for businesses and leaders. And I'm also the president of New York Women and Communications. So happy to be here today.
And welcome to our podcast. So Impossible is a place where we give you a seat at the table and uncover some of the incredible stories of those who have made the impossible possible. So business leaders, professional athletes, global pop artists, movers and shakers all around the world. They're here to share with you the real raw stories of what took them to the places that they are today. And let me tell you, they did not start where they are today. So in a time where we know we need motivation and excitement more than ever, we're so excited to bring you some of those stories. And today, we have the good fortune of having not only my favorite person in my personal life, my spouse, Kevin Weeks. He's also somebody who I appreciate and respect so deeply, and I feel honored to live with every day from a professional standpoint as well. So Kevin has an absolutely unbelievable CV. He comes from two Bajan immigrant parents. At the age of 5 years old, he made the decisive call and ambitious call that he wanted to be one of the few goalies in the NHL. As a child of Bajan parents and in very humble beginnings. So Kevin set out on a path to reach that goal. And as you can imagine, nothing short of a tremendous feat that was filled with ups and downs and twists and turns. Kevin decided after 12 years in the NHL, dressing for over 800 games and playing for multiple teams across the league, that he would break a second boundary, which for him was to become the first Black analyst in hockey history globally. So Kevin today is a force to be reckoned with across the media landscape. You'll see him all over hockey media and global sports media at large. And he's really entered into the ethos of the racial conversation, as you can imagine, over this last year. So Kevin, we are so excited to have you join us today. We're so lucky to have you with us. And the purpose of this show, we can talk about your accolades for hours, but it's really to get into the raw, real story, the human story. And so the question that I want to start with you today is, how does the child that you were at 5 years old decide that you have that massive goal? And for those of you who are joining us and don't know this story about Kevin, he actually wrote it on his kindergarten book that he wanted to be in the NHL. So talk to us about that, Kevin, and take us inside setting that goal as a young child.
Well, thank you both so much for having me. And thanks to Stevie behind the scenes. It's a pleasure to be with you both. You're doing amazing work with this, by the way. So it's an honor and a privilege to be here. But in saying that, and to your question, the biggest thing for me was a real clear, concise, concrete goal. I grew up watching the game and watching hockey back home in Toronto, and my parents, as you mentioned, emigrated to Canada. So seeing it on the TV and then being around my older cousin and his friends playing street hockey, I knew that I wanted to play, and it was pretty crystallized for me mentally that I wanted to play in the NHL and I wanted to be a goalie specifically in the NHL. So it came very natural. It was a very pivotal time for me as a youngster to identify that goal, but clearly and in a very clear and concise way, I knew that that was my life's aspiration.
Amazing. So clearly you're a visionary, right? And from a very young age, you had natural vision. And I think many individuals, business leaders, companies so often try and really figure out their vision. And not everyone is as a natural visionary like you are. So I would love to learn from you around the importance of vision setting and creating that action plan, because you could also be someone who has a vision but doesn't necessarily have an action plan to back it up and make it happen, like clearly you've done. So I'm thinking about the individuals, the college students, or the C-suite business leaders tuning in who really are craving that understanding of how do I create a vision, but then make it happen. So can you teach us something there?
Great question, Ash. I could say this. I think that what's really important is it's almost like when you get in the vehicle and you're going to drive. Now, unless you're just going on a casual drive, a Sunday drive with the family or yourself, and you want to take in the scenics no matter where you live, that's one thing. But I oftentimes love to be able to have a destination in mind. And you talked about that vision, and that vision really sets the destination for me in a lot of ways. It has to be very, very precise. I want to know where I'm going. And that starts with really clearly identifying what that goal looks like. So you can call it a goal, you can call it a vision. Part of that is visualizing around that and ultimately having that ultimate destination of where you want to go. But then more importantly, the destination is one thing, but like your GPS, how are you getting there? How are you going to get to that? What does your roadmap look like? Where are you going? What route or routes are you taking to get to where you aspire to ultimately be? And that's really important. So for me, for example, in playing, it was pretty clear because I wanted to play in the best league in the world, which is the NHL, as far as hockey goes. So I knew that was my ultimate goal. That was my destination. But what it looked like to get there was, number one, for me in youth hockey, growing up in Toronto, playing at the highest possible level from the outset, playing for one of the best clubs at the time. But then all the other things that act as kind of streets, if you will, or roadways on that overall roadmap to get to the NHL. So extra practice, extra ice time, extra goalie sessions, workouts, dry land training, working in the park, stretching at home, watching games, consuming the game, learning from watching the game, tinkering with my goalie equipment, learning from other goalies that were older than me by watching, whether you're watching NHL or junior or U.S. college hockey, seeing what they were doing to have success, reading, and literally visualizing myself playing in the league, seeing myself playing in New York one day at Madison Square Garden, seeing myself play on a Saturday night in Montreal against the Montreal Canadiens. So all of those different kind of elements or roadways or roadmaps led to the ultimate destination. But having the destination without the roadmap makes things tougher, I'd say, and certainly more difficult, I find. So I was very fortunate in that I had the destination in mind. So from there, it was literally a matter of programming into the GPS, so to speak, what it would take, which ways it would take for me to get there. And it's not always perfect. And in fact, sometimes you might be going down a certain road. It might be a fork in the road. You've got to go in the other direction. Sometimes you got to do a U-turn, button hook, come back, all that metaphorically, of course. But that was the biggest thing for me. And that's still the biggest thing for me today, is having a clear, concise goal and then filling in what the roadmap to getting there looks like.
And Kev, I have a two-part question as a follow-up to that. So setting that vision at 4 or 5 years old, and even today, I think, as Ashley mentioned, a lot of people have those types of things that pop up. And it might be a goal or an ambition that you might talk yourself in and out of, or you might commit
Sure.
to otherwise. So the first part of the question is, even at 5 years old, how did you know that that was the thing that you were going to commit to, is the first part of it. The second part of it is the level of ambition associated with that. Just to take you guys inside, and maybe we can show you some pictures as well of Kevin as the child in a tiny apartment with immigrant parents. You had no exposure really outside of watching the NHL on television. And I think so many people, particularly people who are in not the easiest of circumstances, might have those visions and talk themselves out of them. So the second part of the question is, how did you balance between figuring out what was too ambitious or ambitious enough, and navigating that both inside of yourselves as well as within your community?
So as far as how did I set that, I started, by watching the games on TV and watching with my parents and seeing NHL over and over and over. And of course, growing up in Toronto, it's the Toronto Maple Leafs. And are they playing the Montreal Canadiens? Is it the Edmonton Oilers, the New York Rangers, the Minnesota North Stars, now Dallas Stars, whoever, the LA Kings, whoever it was that was playing. But I wanted to watch all the time. And of course, in the 70s and early 80s, the media wasn't what it's become today in terms of availability and frequency of games, in terms of programming. But all that to say, I saw that. But then my older cousin and his friends, I'm born in 75. A lot of them were born in 68, 67, 66, and quite older than me. And I would watch them play street hockey behind our building. And I was literally the ball chaser. That's what I was the ball chaser. I would be watching the ball, watching them, because playing street hockey, you play with a ball. And I'd be watching them while they were playing. And as they were playing, it was interesting because the one goalie who was always in the one net, his name is Lambros, and his parents had emigrated from Greece to Toronto. And then for whatever crazy reason, they went back rather from Toronto back to Greece. So they're like, hey, if you want to hang, you got to get in the net. You got to play. And I was perfect. I'll go in the net. That's where I want to be anyways. And that's kind of how that started in terms of my introduction to the game. But then as far as the ambitious nature of the goal, I never thought about it being ambitious. I never thought about it being otherworldly. I never thought about the statistics. And when I heard people, both that looked like me and that didn't, on the color wheel, if I ever heard people say, well, that's impossible, people never going to make the inning, you can't go anywhere in pro sports, it's an impossibility. Especially you're black, you're going to play hockey, it's not going to happen. How can you even think you're going to do that? Why are you wasting your time? Why aren't you running track? Why aren't you playing basketball more? Why aren't you playing football? Those are sports where you have an opportunity. And quite frankly, as I said, what was wild about that is that's for people, again, that look like me, and for people that didn't, that felt that way. And it never, ever, ever occurred to me the fact that as a youngster, there are only 50 to 60 NHL goalies in the world. I never thought about that. And as I got older, I never thought about that. All I knew was I was going to freaking get there, and I was going to make it, and I was going to be there. That's what I knew. But I never listened to the naysayers at that time. And I don't know if I benefited from childhood innocence. And I don't know, also, I do know I should say that I benefited from loving parents, and then subsequently my little sister when she came along. But in our household, it was never, that's too much. Don't try that. That's never going to happen. You might want to put your focus elsewhere. My parents never had that type of dialogue ever around this. And that was helpful.
I love that. And clearly creating this vision, having a plan, being accountable to it, but then also it seems like another recipe for your success is just full and total immersion into this goal, and just every aspect of it. You dove in and put blinders on to anything happening around you, and you went and made it happen. So, which gets to my question is, if you could articulate, because what I see based on everything I know about you, and you're one of our Franklin West business ambassadors as well, and you have this incredible entrepreneurial spirit beyond hockey. You're doing so many things across the business community. So what is your formula for success? If you could articulate it, there are just obviously key elements that you focus on that make you wildly successful beyond hockey. So what is that?
Thank you. I would say, I love your word when you said immerse. So I do believe that immersion in a way that's 360, immersing oneself, herself, themselves. I think that that's absolutely critical, because you can't be 1-2 toes in the water and then expect to ultimately achieve a goal, really and truly, right? And, you know, if it's an Italian nonna making pasta, like, maybe I'm going to get flour. I might use a rolling pin, but I'm not sure. Am I going to boil the water? But maybe not. Am I going to salt it? I don't really know. What sauce? Like, no. Like, this is the dish I'm making, and this is what I'm committed to, and this is what I'm going to serve my family, ultimately, right? That's kind of their perspective, and it's no different for me. Like, being completely, as you said, immersed in that from a young age. It wasn't, okay, maybe I'm going to spray paint my hair purple, and then maybe I want to ride my bike, but I kind of don't. But then I want to go to practice, but then I really don't. And then my friends are going to the mall, but I have a game, so I'm going to be. Never, ever, not one time. it was all, as you mentioned, it was all fully immersive. I was completely engrossed in playing, practicing, repeat, play, practice, train, repeat, practice, play, perform, repeat, and go to school, obviously, as you know, as a young kid. But my whole thing, it was all 110% dedicated in a 360-degree way in and around playing and becoming and being great and becoming great and getting better and learning and evolving.
You wanted to be the best that you could be.
Totally.
So it's always on process of refining your craft. And
yes.
And it actually reminds me, my husband's grandfather, who was a very successful businessman back in the day, he said, and his father told him, if you're the peanut vendor on the side of the street, be the best damn peanut vendor there ever was.
Yes.
Right? It doesn't matter what your goal is. Be the best, not that's out there, be the best that you could possibly be at your passion and success.
100%. Yeah, no, 100%. That's wise advice from him. You know, look, I try to apply that to every area of my life, right? Because I can't play and I couldn't play hockey 360, 5 days a year, as much as I would have loved to as a kid. But there's other elements, and as you get older, a lot of the same things that allowed me to have success in hockey are what I apply to, multimedia and business and community and everything else. And at home, quite frankly, which Meg can attest to. Like if I'm washing dishes when I was young, my mom or dad wouldn't be like, okay, well, yeah, it's no big deal. There's a little bit of there's a little dry food on that fork. Yeah, that's okay. You can put it in. No, wash it again and do it properly. You know what I mean? Wash it properly because we have to eat though. We have to eat off of that. Right. So it's that same ethos that I apply to my commitment to the game that I now apply to other elements of my life too, whether it be, as I said, media, business endeavors, things of that nature.
In order to execute at your level, you have to also, I'm imagining, decide what you're no longer going to do or what's becomes
totally
deprioritized in your life or what people might not no longer be in your life. So maybe as a part two to that question is, how do you weed out the low value intrusions that might come in so that you can really be the best at your priority items?
Listen, that's a great question. I'd say as human beings, we all have different things that can kind of compete for our attention at times. Right. And sometimes things are a little mindless or maybe not the most redeeming for us. You hear people say, oh, sometimes my guilty pleasure is eating chocolate, or for me, it's eating potato chips, or for other people, it's watching Netflix or whatever the case may be. But ultimately, in the end, it's about the goals. And it's about, as I say, Meg will probably laugh at this, I always say the level. And if it's not on the level, then I really don't typically want it that much. And it's not going to really garner that much of my attention as such. So being really hyper-focused in what you're aspiring to do, here's the thing for you, and I'm going to share this for the viewers. I remember being, and it was a very clear-cut thing because I had the structure at home, luckily, because it started at home. So I never had to force feed myself to be disciplined in hockey, because I had discipline and structure at home from my mom and dad, and then extended from my aunt and uncle and stuff. And, our family structure and our cultural values, they were the underpinnings and they are the underpinnings for everything. So when I got to the rink and it required discipline, or going to run the stairs at Jack Goodlad Park, or doing bench hops and plyometrics and doing all these things and going to the Scarborough YMCA back home, it was never seen as being otherworldly. It was just natural. Because again, a lot of those values came from home. But here's the one thing to tie a bow on that. I remember being 8 years old and, being an underage player, playing with kids older than myself, playing elite hockey from when I was 8. And I remember if I would let in a goal, and the odd time if I let in a crappy goal, I remember the reaction from teammates. Oh my Kev, come on. Some parents in the stands, oh, come on, like, Kev, you got to stop that. So that didn't change literally from when I was 8 to when I'm playing in the NHL on a Saturday night in Montreal against Montreal Canadiens, or again, playing at Madison Square Garden against the Rangers or as a member of the New York Rangers, that never changed since I was 8. You still get the same reaction. So it was very crystallized for me. And I knew at that point as an 8-year-old, okay, listen, this is the responsibility of me playing this position. This is what's expected of me. This is what I expect of myself. So take it from being that little 8-year-old kid to, as I said, playing in the NHL and now being on TV. I look at it the exact same way. I want to perform. I want to add value. I want to play to my potential. I want to over-deliver. I want to contribute. And more importantly, as a former athlete and a team athlete, I want to win. And ultimately, I want those around me to win as well. But it's a very insular, I could tell you, ladies, it's a very insular track, especially being a goalie. Because keep this in mind. Let's say, I can tilt over my shoulder onto the TV, and let's say I'm playing. I want to be on the right side of the highlights. I want our team to be on the right side of the highlights and on the right side of the scoreboard at the end of the game. Because if not, people in LA are going to be laughing. They're going to watch the highlights. What happened to Weeks and his team today? He was terrible. Then it's going to be in the New York Post. Then it's going to be in every other publication around the world that covers hockey. Then friends of mine that live in Switzerland are going to see it in Germany and all across the US and Canada. I don't like to be on the wrong side of the highlight reel. I want to be on the right side of the highlight reel, and I want our teams and my people in everyday life too to be on the right side of that as well.
And you don't want to be on the wrong side of the dishes wheel either. I can attest to that.
Exactly.
It's true. I mean, you don't have much of an off switch in terms of your ambition. I mean, whatever you do, you always want to do it very, 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 very well. And regardless of the career path that you would have chosen, I think because of your ambition and attention to detail and care, you would have done exceptionally well. I have zero doubt. I want to talk to you a little bit about modeling, because I think we have a lot of people who are tuning in.
Yeah.
We like to establish in every single one of these episodes that this is an inclusive environment, full stop. No matter your background, you're welcome here. We honor you being a part of this conversation, and this dialogue is for you. So as somebody who, as many, many people do, you come from immigrant parents. You were a Black man in a very, very white environment. Let's just say that for what it is.
Totally, of course.
You had some models, you had some fragments of models, and subsequently in your secondary career, you had really no model because you were the first person to ever do it. Between your family experience and the world at large, what was the importance of modeling to you? How did you create models yourself? And, what did that journey look like for you as you navigated breaking boundaries, without really the roadmap ahead of you?
Yeah, great points there. A lot of that started at home in terms of the models. I had, my mom and dad that both worked full time and that weren't complaining about how cold it was in Canada, that never complained about the snow and the ice and the wind and the winter, which can be pretty extreme, especially in the 70s and 80s, pre-global warming to what it is today. And even today, it's still fairly extreme in Canada. But specifically at that time frame, just based on environmental factors, et cetera, winters were super harsh and hard. And keep in mind, having parents that came from Barbados to Canada to Toronto, that's a very sharp contrast and juxtaposition between palm trees, mangoes, coconuts, and fresh fish, and then ice, road salt to combat the ice, centimeters of snow, inches of snow, the whole thing. That's a very different world. And I never, ever heard my parents complain about that, ever. And they both took public transit until they bought their first vehicle when I started playing elite hockey. So that would have been 8 years. They both took public transit to work, from work, and to everything else. So, and taxis. So, because we lived downtown at the time. So that really kind of set that stage for me, so to speak, in terms of the modeling, because more importantly, I was seeing that at home. And I was very culturally aware, culturally fluent in my culture, because my parents, like a lot of people can attest, whose parents are immigrants and fellow immigrants, a lot of your cultural underpinnings are a big part of your identity. So I had that. But then I would say, as far as outwardly beyond the house, there were some players, very few, and they're the odd goalie that played in the NHL, Grant Fuhr being the chief one who played largely for the Edmonton Oilers with Wayne Gretzky and won all those Stanley Cups. And he's a Hockey Hall of Famer. He was a great goalie, so I loved watching him. He was fun to watch. He was dynamic in the net. He was a champion, played internationally for Team Canada, and so well decorated and had an amazing career. So in a lot of ways, I looked at him. I looked at his style of play and all the success he was having alongside the other Hall of Famers, including himself, but Wayne Gretzky, Mark Messier, the likes. But then there are a few others that came. Freddie Brathwaite, who played a little bit for the Edmonton Oilers and some for the Calgary Flames and played in the NHL, whose parents were also from Barbados. So that, for me, really resonated with me, but not limited to, because there were other goalies that I just loved watching, whether they were white American, white Canadian, European, whatever their background was, because they were great at the craft. So I took from everybody where that's concerned. But if I had to pick one North Star, and I was speaking about this on another podcast yesterday, if I had to take one North Star for me, it's the great Michael Jordan. Like everything, and I remember watching him in 83, 84, and when he first burst on the scene with the Chicago Bulls in the NBA, and then watching his progression and the same level of effort, intensity, consistency, over performance, over delivery, passion, every game. And, I started hyper consuming him at the time. And then the Air Jordan shoes came out, and Sports Illustrated and some of the other publications just trying to just get a glimpse of what he was doing and what he was up to. And among other athletes as well, too, I should say. But one North Star would be him. And watching his progression as a player and his greatness and dominance as a player, I've never seen anything like it. I don't think the world has. But then also seeing him mirror that with his progression as a businessman. And as a son for him, of his family and his parents and his grandparents who were sharecroppers in North Carolina, to then becoming the best athlete on planet Earth, to become the best basketball player of all time, but to also kind of augment that with becoming this great business titan as well, and becoming a billionaire and becoming an owner of a team in the Charlotte Hornets right now, as the first former athlete to be a majority owner of one of the big four sports clubs. And the fact that he happens to be Black, and as successful and as transcendent as he has been on and off the floor and in the boardroom, it's just really, it's cemented everything that I thought he was. And then having the chance to attend a few of his events and be around him and seeing it 3D up close, I've never seen anything like it. I've never been around anything like it. And maybe he's heard some other people describe it. He doesn't walk when you're around him. It's like he floats in the air. Hence his nickname, Air Jordan, because he looked that way when he was playing with his elevation, his ability to jump. But in everyday life, in being around him, it's like he's hovering above the ground. It's really surreal, and only people that have been around him can really understand what I mean. But I would say he's that one person outside of the home for me that's been that North Star, among others, but he would be the North Star for me.
I love it. That's so inspiring. My next question for you is really around, we're living in a social media sort of first world in a way.
Sure.
I feel like the outside world looks in, especially successful people like yourself, and it just looks like this linear path and everything is going for Kevin Weeks, and he has just never had real setbacks. It's all happening for him and it might not be happening for me. Right. And I really would love to hear from you, and I know our viewers would as well, on a real setback, either personally, professionally, where it really rocked you and you had to then take a step back, self-reflect, and figure out how to maybe course correct and get back on track. And we've all had them. But if you wouldn't mind, and I know that's a super vulnerable question, but is there a setback that really maybe transformed your life for the better?
How much time do you ladies have? I've had so many of them. and your great viewers, I've had so many setbacks. I appreciate you asking. There have been a ton of them. I mean, let's just start with the fact that in my former career, my playing career, that would be being a goalie in hockey is the only job in the world where there's a red light that goes on behind you when you make a mistake, or even if you don't. But when the opposing team scores in a game, the red light goes on behind you. It's the only job on planet Earth. And some people can see some some comps in terms of pressure between goalie, quarterback, goalie, pitcher in baseball. There's nothing like playing goalie. So it's very humbling. And quite frankly, starting in practice, your own teammates are taking rockets of shots, these slap shots and everything else. They're trying to score on you every day. And you're trying to stop them every day, right? That's the, the cat and mouse game between being a goalie and facing the shooters. But you have to face your own teammates, your own shooters every day in practice. So that's really where it starts for me, right? A lot of it starts there. And in that, you let in goals that are embarrassing. I remember letting in a goal. I was 15 years old. The arena was packed. We were playing the Toronto Marlies. We had finished, I think, 40 points ahead of them in the standings in the playoffs. And I literally let in a goal from the other end of the ice. Like literally from the other end of the ice. Not even at center ice halfway. The other end of the rink, I let in a goal from. I just had a brain cramp and a miscue, and I just misplayed this. It was clearly a harmless shot, the opposing player shot. And it went in, and I could still hear the whole arena. And it was at our home rink. The rink was jammed. We had scouts from Canadian Major Junior Hockey, U.S. colleges, NHL scouts. The rink was rammed with scouts. And I'm a top prospect at the time. And I let this goal in, and I'll never forget the feeling of letting that goal in. And we get in the car, and my dad, my mom, they never said anything to me ever about how I played. And I remember getting in the car. I get in the passenger seat. My dad's like, "What happened on that goal? What happened?" And I'm like, "Dad, I don't know, man. It was terrible. I don't know." And that's the only time that he has ever said anything, or my mom has ever really said anything about a goal that I let in. It was that terrible of a goal. But if you can imagine the embarrassment, the shame, you're supposed to be the guy. You're this top prospect coming out of Toronto. You're supposed to be the top prospect in Canada, one of the top prospects in the world. And you let this goal in. So you fail in front of everyone, right? And again, that same red light that I talk about goes on behind you. That was one. I then remember I was supposed to be drafted that same year to go and play Canadian Major Junior Hockey as an underage. I wasn't drafted. Put on my suit, went there, showed up at the draft, didn't get drafted that year. So there was a lot of delayed gratification along the way. I remember getting traded when I got to the NHL. Actually, let me talk about when I got to the NHL. I couldn't win a game to save my life. I think I was like 0-13-1. And the chatter just kept getting louder and louder. Well, he was dominant in the minor leagues, can't win in the NHL. Another game, can't win in this league. Another game, Weeks loses again, team loses again. And it was literally all over North America, but literally all over the world for people in the hockey business. And if you could imagine, you're literally failing, even though I had some really good games, even though I played well in some of those games, quite frankly, from the first minute of the game to the end, it wasn't good enough to win. And I was literally barbecued in all these different publications, on all these different, TV platforms and everything else. And it took until the following season, because that was a kind of a half season, the back half of that season. The following season, our first game, ironically, against the New York Rangers, we were at home in Vancouver at the time, and I was playing for Vancouver. We won that game. And it kind of put that all to bed. But I can tell you, I could literally feel the pressure in my throat, not even my chest or my abdomen, in my throat. And getting my first win against the Rangers was huge. I think I was first star that game. But then even getting traded, like even when I got traded from there, I was literally publicly barbecued, smeared. And I then get traded to New York, to the New York Islanders. And within a matter of weeks, although I was publicly barbecued, having just gotten traded, then in New York, all of a sudden, people are like, "Oh, this kid's a great young man. It's this. He's an NHL ambassador. He's doing work with the NHL on diversity and helping to grow the game." And those were some of my lowest points that I could share as far as playing. And if I could just tell you about how ruthless some people are, how much some people lack in empathy and compassion and decency. But I'm just sharing some of that with you. And then from a personal standpoint too, I've been through a ton of things personally. Like you're waiting for a contract. We don't know what's going to happen. What do you mean we don't know what's going to happen? I have personal commitments. Yeah, we're not really sure. What do you mean you're not really sure? Well, we haven't done the rights deal yet. What do you mean? And, you know, you have all these commitments financially, family-wise, and all these other things. I've literally, it's been really challenging at times going through the legal process and different things too, having people assail your name, false accusations, unfair work environment, racism, getting bananas thrown at my head when I was playing, in racist incidents. There's so many of those things that I've had along the way. But fortunately, in us, and Megan and I, having great families and having, you know, loving support systems in each other as well, and our families, in addition to that, that's helped me continue to push forward and overcome a lot of that said adversity. And those things are really hurtful, though. It's not easy.
I hate to hear that, but clearly, would you give credit to your support system and how you powered through? Like, or is there something, what is the learning in terms of, it seems like you kept going and you stayed in the arena and you sucked it up and powered through, right? Like,
Totally.
What's the learning for people when you're faced with this adversity in order to come out on the other side? What should people do?
I think the biggest thing you touched on is having a great support system, which is pivotal. I think that's critical. To me, everything starts there. And people that are fair but loving and supportive, they'll give you what's real. They're not going to pet and powder and coddle you, but they're going to be loving and supportive and be real in ways that they have to, based on what the dynamics are. I would then say, you know, I would say, when you're going through that, you just have to keep going. Like, I literally felt like playing hockey. And once I got to junior and then pro and then to the league in the NHL, I've said this before, I felt like I was walking a high wire over Niagara Falls with no safety net. That's what it felt like. There's no exaggeration. There's no, you know, I'm not trying to amplify anything. That's exactly what it was like. Because everything I did was hyper-evaluated, hyper-scrutinized. Okay, well, we're not really sure. Discredited, discounted. Because not everybody wanted to see me there. Not everybody wanted to see me in that league. Not everybody, it's seen as being a white sport, right? And it's seen as being an elitist sport in some ways, and not always necessarily the most welcoming. And certainly not in my time as a player, although things are pseudo changing slowly. The iceberg is slowly moving. But you know what I mean? Like, for me, that's what it felt like. And I think the biggest things, again, I guess it was Benjamin Franklin that said, when you're going through hell, just keep going. There's no sense in stopping. You know, when you're going through, you just got to power through, put your head down, and ultimately power through. That's a big part of the learning, in addition to the home and your support system. But here's the thing too, right? As I said, from the outset, I knew what my goal was. I know what my end goals were and what my end goal was. So imagine if you're driving somewhere, and that's why I try to relate this to driving for a lot of your viewers, listeners. You know you're driving somewhere. So let's say if your end goal is to ultimately end up in, let's say you're going to Park City, Utah. You're driving to Park City, Utah. You probably know along the way you're going to hit some weather systems. It's not likely going to be sunny your entire drive, depending on where you're coming from. So you might hit some hail, you might hit some rain, you might hit some sleet, you might hit some snow, and it's really no different, and some wind. And it's really no different in life. I think that's a pretty good metaphor for that.
It's been amazing, Kev, to watch you. I have the great privilege of seeing, I guess, the gifts that have come from the difficulties that you've had. An example of that being your experience with racism has given you such tremendous compassion. And I think it really, really sharpened your pen in terms of your ability to navigate the most difficult of conversations, many of which have happened in the last year. So a saying, Ashley, in our household that we have is that the trouble makes the trail. And I know what I see in watching you and the difficulty that you've been through and all the little things that you've, carved out of seemingly nothing, and the amazing, feats of overcoming adversity that I've seen. But how would you articulate that for the viewers and listeners who are tuning in today? How has the trouble made your trail?
I would say that, and thank you. I would say that the trouble makes a trail because it sharpens your axe, so to speak. Metaphorically speaking, it sharpens that. You have no choice. It's fight or flight, and some of these things, although you don't want them to have to harden you, they do. Like, that's the reality of some of these needless adversity too at times. Some adversity we all invite into our lives, vulnerably speaking. But a lot of what we're discussing, even more so, is environmental, situational, work environment, public environment, and then sometimes even personal environment as well. And it certainly has been all of those for me, and a combination of all those things. And quite frankly, if and when you learn how to push through, how to overcome, how to trek on, how to march on, rock on, and continue rolling and doing your thing, you become better for that. You become better for that. Not that you would have wanted that to necessarily be better, because really, no, you don't want to go in and go to a menu and say, I want this adversity, that adversity, that adversity. You're not going to order it off the menu. You know what I mean? At the drive-through. But nonetheless, when it does come your way, or if it does present itself, and believe me, it doesn't matter who we are, it will. And it doesn't matter who's tuning in, it will for you as well. But when you can stay true to who you are, true to what you are, learn, evolve, grow, overcome, and keep it moving in the right direction, it certainly makes you better. And it can make you better, no question.
It's been amazing. I think what a career you've built in your second active life, Kevin, based on handling the most difficult of circumstances with grace. And so that's just a huge compliment to you, because I think in this past year, there's been so many people have been challenged in all types of different ways. And most certainly all of us will remember those of us who handled it with, grace and compassion and empathy. We've solidified some relationships in this past year that will stand the test of time now, I think, forever, because people were able to, really show the best side of themselves in the most difficult of circumstances.
Let me piggyback that quickly. And those are great points too. Here's the thing. And I want to be clear for a lot of viewers and listeners that are tuning in. I love to over-index on the grace. And there's times when you have to mix grace with some salt and some pepper. So just to be real, because some people, when you're exhibiting the grace and you're doing that in a way that should be very disarming, sometimes people lean in and then they'll push you more, and then they'll continue pushing you more, and they'll continue pushing you more. So you might have had grace 1, grace 2, grace 3, grace 10, grace 20, grace 25. Now it's time for a little bit of cayenne pepper to come out, or a little salt, or a combination. And I just have to be real about that too, because sometimes people continue to push and they push and they push, and people are very cunning, and people can be very cunning, that are the ones that are needlessly applying that adversity to you. And they're doing that oftentimes in ways, well, let me get a reaction. Let's see. Well, I could do more. Well, I could ask them to do more. I could put them in a bad spot even more. And sometimes you have to badger your way out of a situation. And as I said, put the grace and put the honey jar down and bare your fangs a little bit. Sometimes that's what it takes, because you have to defend yourself oftentimes, and you have to defend your family. You have to defend your value sets. And I've been in those situations before, specifically personally and professionally, in and around race and other things, where, you know what? Hey, listen, we tried this route. We tried the diplomatic route numerous times. We tried the patient route numerous times, but they now continue to order off the menu that they want to see your fangs. Sometimes you have to show them to them. So I think that's a big part of it, but I'll just tie a bow and then kick it back to Ash. Especially around gender-related things, race-related things that we've seen and we've experienced, all of us here on this Zoom have experienced. What's been really enlightening, twofold. Number one, as you alluded to, the people around that have showed the empathy, that have shown the compassion, that have shown the humanity and support. And even for those that might not have started out that way, even through the Civil Rights Movement 2.0 and some of the gender movement and the things that we've seen and the things we've all experienced, COVID, et cetera, some people have come out, even if they weren't the best on the moral kind of value set before, this has been a learning for some of them. And I've had numerous people reach out to me that way and, hey, I never really knew, or hey, I never really thought, or hey, did you feel this way? Would this happen between us? Or hey, could I have handled this better? And I want to give them credit for their transformation as well and their growth. And then there are other people in general that have just been so high functioning that have always been that and continue to exemplify that. I can't tell you the amount of texts, as you know, Meg, the amount of texts that I've gotten and calls from people in support of this experience that I've had my whole life, quite frankly, but which was brought to life in a real fulsome way with this Civil Rights 2.0 movement in this last year and change. So I really appreciate those people as well.
So before I dive into my next question, something that's really resonating with me is the power of your support system, but then also because you're naturally such a generous, kind, giving, graceful person, making sure that the folks you include in your support system share in that generosity and give back. And I look at you, Kev, and Megan, and we have a very special relationship, but it's really a 360 circle of constant generosity and support that goes both ways. So I think
100%.
you reach a certain point, hopefully in your life and your career, where you become very protective over who you let in that circle.
Oh my God.
And
yes.
And I think you're such a great example of that, and sort of how it's helped you get to where you are today, and also how you treat yourself as a person and that self-care and self-respect aspect. But my question for you is, knowing that you are so resilient and confident and successful, do you have an inner critic?
Oh yeah, totally.
Talk to us about, have you named your inner critic? Like, talk to us about your inner critic.
Yeah, no, I'll never tame that. I think the confident, the successful, and the graceful, and all those things that you mentioned. Thank you. I think the biggest thing with all of that is there is super vulnerability. There is a super sense of openness and wanting to learn and really wanting to provide and wanting to deliver and wanting to showcase and wanting to perform and really wanting to enjoy that with people beyond me, like in the circle and people outside of the circle, right? Like, that's not always easy. And there's a lot of downtimes. Listen, we came on this Zoom and I said from the outset that I've had these hives now for 13 months, give or take. And this morning I woke up and I could have went and sat behind home plate and had a pitcher. I wouldn't even need a catcher's mitt. I just put my mouth there and let a pitcher throw the ball, and I catch it with my lips just based on them being swollen from some of these allergic reactions that I've been having inexplicably. Listen, I'm here with you all and with your amazing viewer listeners and all of you that are tuned in, vulnerably with that right off the top. Like, and I go on TV in 160 countries around the world, and I've had instances of that too, where my lips swollen. Okay, the other side of my lips swollen from these allergies. Okay, and hey, everybody, what's up? How's everybody doing? Welcome to the show. Appreciate you NHL fans tuning in and watching us here on the NHL Network, or me doing Zoom with a player or somebody else in the business or in business or going to business meetings. And you don't necessarily, that you're not at your peak look, which a lot of ladies certainly will be able to identify with themselves, even more so than the men. But you soldier on. You press on. Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't feel like you're 100% at your peak, but rock it in other ways. Just push forward, rock it in other ways. Okay, is my suit on point? Okay, cool. Is your dress on point? Okay, how's hair and makeup? How are you feeling? What can you maybe amplify your energy a little bit more? There's so many different parts to you and to us that we have that go beyond just the one dimension of who we are and what we are. So that's really important too. I think that's really important to kind of highlight for the listener viewers. And then what's also interesting about it is it's not always going to be perfect, but it's about the end result. And it's the same thing, right? It's the same thing as playing. Like, you're not always going to have your A game, but at the end of the game, I want my teammates when I was playing to come in and tap me on the head, dab me up. Okay, we won the game, boys. Let's move on. It wasn't always the best. It wasn't always your cleanest or your peak performance. But ultimately, when you push through, you can win by pushing through. Because a lot of times you get a little uncomfortable, you get dinged up. Again, as a goalie, I let in 2 crappy goals early in the game. Am I going to fold my tent now, or am I going to keep playing? And it's the same thing for a lot of you. Things might not go the way you want. You might not get that promotion. Okay, are you sucking out, or are you still pushing? Are you going to prove them wrong? You might not get your fair comp, which a lot of us can certainly attest to. And they're going to play head games with your comp. Sorry, we're going to bonus you. Sorry, we can't. Sorry, we could pay you, but it's a bonus. But it's not, but it's also the budget. But we can't, but the position. Whatever, shine, push, shine, keep pushing. And if it doesn't work there, maybe it'll work elsewhere. And if it's not valued there, maybe that prompts you to say, let me just take stock of this. Maybe we're going to do something different. As you have with Franklin West. Maybe we're going to, maybe the universe is telling me this. We're transitioning. And obviously you and your husband are super successful in what you do. But sometimes that is the blessing in what seems like the adversity and the hurt and the pain.
It's been amazing to watch you, Kev. And you've taught me so much about vulnerability. I think just your willingness to even share the silliest little stories of health issues that you're facing or otherwise. And, I think for so many of us, we go through that process in a very micro way. So I know as my career has grown, my first time I presented in a meeting, I was really nervous. And certainly the first time I made a mistake publicly, those are awful feelings. And as that scale grows and the pressure grows, you realize how bare naked you are as your success grows. And as there's more eyes on you. And so first of all, just thank you for helping me navigate through all of that. You've been an amazing mentor and partner in that. But how do you navigate that feeling? And I know you've talked to me about times, and I've watched you go on television with the most embarrassing of cold sores or lips, or your pants break live on television, or all of our kind of like worst nightmares, as you would say, publicly. Back to your playing career, as you mentioned, when there's a goal that's scored and it's all over the news the next day. How do you navigate that with a sense of humor and a sense of vulnerability, but staying up and staying motivated while you experience those things really in front of so many people every day?
Great question, too. I look at this, ladies. I look at this, okay? The best of the best of the best of the best in whatever it is, they don't nail it every time. They're wired to. They're wired to compete to. They're wired to have the processes and places too. But I don't care how many Michelin stars you have as a chef, whether you're the great Gordon Ramsay, you're the great Wolfgang Puck, you're Daniel Boulud, it doesn't really matter. Every truffle risotto you make is not going to be 15 out of 10. Just not going to be, right? And although you push yourself to, although you want to, you've committed to, somehow, be it the science, be it, maybe a little bit of a jitter in your left hand, maybe you oversalt it, maybe you undersalt it. Something happens that comes out and it gets plated and it goes to the table, and it's not a 100 out of 100. It's not a 10 out of 10. Maybe it's actually a 6 out of 10. Maybe it's a 65 out of 100. But you have to learn from that. And what I say is, those are the best of the best. It's no different with Oprah. As great as she is, as great as she's been, Serena Williams, as great as another GOAT, the greatest. Cristiano Ronaldo, the greatest. Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods. I can go into any element. Some of the most successful, you look at the founder of Spanx, some of the most successful women in business and entertainment and sports, and J-Lo and whoever it is, it's not always on. And if it's not always on for them, it's certainly not always going to be on for us. Do you know what I mean? I played with Hall of Famers, a lot of them. Played against them, but played with a lot of Hall of Famers. And as much as they were wired as we were and are, but as they were wired every day to show that they're a Hall of Fame player, produce, deliver, repeat, sometimes it just wasn't there for them. So if that's them, for the rest of us, I'm able to put in perspective that we're going to trip up from time to time, and it's not going to always be perfect. And not in a way that's, because accountability is always forward. But sometimes it's okay to laugh, and sometimes it's okay not to make light, because depending on the magnitude, but own it. Hey, listen, that was brutal. I don't know what I was thinking there. That's on me. I'll be better. And I remember we were live on the NHL Network a few years ago, and I don't recall the producer in my ear saying, okay, we're coming up live, or whatever the case may be, because sometimes we'll tape offline. But I remember Tony Luckman was hosting, and he's like, we see, so this happened between the Nashville Predators and the Florida Panthers, blah, blah, blah. And then after, I'm like, okay, we'll do it again. And Tony's like, no, we're live. And I go, we're live? No problem. And then I just gave my answer. You know what I mean? Like, honestly, I almost got run over by the Zamboni doing a live hit. You could pull it up on YouTube. Doing a live hit beside Scott Oak, ice level, literally ice level by the Zamboni doors. The Zamboni's coming off the ice. It just finished resurfacing the ice. We're live to the world. I got my mic. And as we're talking, the Zamboni driver, anyway, it's another conversation. He speeds up. It's the only Zamboni driver I've ever seen in any arena. Speed up, where you see people standing in the drive path to come back into the rink off the ice. He literally I heard the gas on the gas pedal. I'm like, bro, what are you doing? But I literally moved to the side while we were on. I kept talking, kept it moving, and whatever, it's all good. Like, those things happen from time to time, no matter who we are. So embrace them, be accountable for them, and have a little sense of humor and some grace around it too.
So Kev, our last question that we ask all of our guests.
Okay.
Is, what is possible?
Any and everything. Any and everything.
I love it.
Any and everything. Any and everything. If I can leave your viewer listeners with a few different things today, any and everything is possible, which is a great play on the name of your amazing podcast that you ladies are doing. And I think any and everything is possible for any and everybody. Really. I feel like people a lot of times feel like they're predisposed to being on one track and have limitations. My parents are Syrian. My uncle's Lebanese. My aunt is Portuguese. My grandfather's Polish. I'm white. I'm black. I'm transgender. You're black. You're not this. You're not that. Forget all that. Forget all of that. And don't underestimate your own potential. If and or when, because it's hinging on this, if and or when, number one, you believe in yourself, but number two, you really invest in yourself and your goals. That's extremely important. And don't settle. And I always say this too, and I can tell you this as somebody that grew up as the fan. I grew up as the kid that wasn't supposed to be there. Technically, statistically, I'm not supposed to be here. And in certain respects, neither are either of you. And you've been able to overcome that. Both of you not only overcome, but over-deliver and shatter that perceived and or real glass ceiling, and many of them that you both have faced, and continue to rock on and over-deliver and shine, right? It's no different. And I think being a 5-year-old, 6-year-old kid growing up and watching the sport and ultimately buying hockey cards and having posters on my wall and looking at these people and aspiring to be them, I know what it feels like to be a fan. And I'll always be a fan of excellence and greatness in any walk of life. But nonetheless, don't settle for being a fan. Don't sell yourself short. Don't always be talking about, oh, this hotel's so gorgeous. When we were on vacation and we went to the hotel, and then you come home and you don't like your living space. Do something about your living space. Don't just be a fan of the hotel. You're only there for 10 days. You're in your house for 355 days or whatever it is. Do you know what I mean? Like, don't just be looking, and I always call the Dusty Springfield for her song, Wishing and Hoping. Don't just settle for wishing and hoping. Oh, I saw Sarah Jessica Parker. She's doing so great. Ellen's doing amazing. Oprah's doing amazing. This person's doing amazing. oh my God, I'm such a fan. What are you doing? Remember, fans pay. Performers get paid. So what are you performing in any line of work? You know what I mean? Don't settle and don't sell yourself short by saying, it's fine. I'm a huge fan of the New Orleans Saints. It's okay. I'm going to put my beads on. I'm going to wear a gold hat and wear a New Orleans Saints jersey, and I'm going to go and watch them play. Yeah, but you're selling yourself short in your career ambition. So it's fine to be a fan there, but not to the extent to where one sells her or him or themselves short. That's really important.
You're a gift, Kevin. Thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who are listening to us, actually, Kevin's life story was the basis for the idea of this podcast, because as he mentioned, statistically, he should be nowhere near where he is today, but just based on his resilience and human equity and his amazing drive, he has achieved the impossible. So for all of you who are listening, there's so many takeaways. Please rewind this episode, because don't settle for being a fan. Walk into your embarrassment, lean into those things. There's so many things that we learned today. We believe in you. We love you. Anything is possible. You heard it from the horse's mouth. And we thank you so much for joining us today. And all the best to all of you in this time. We look forward to chatting with you in our next episode.